For decades, many African Americans have had an ill feeling toward the criminal justice system. There have been numerous cases of the system treating African Americans poorly, some cases being documented and some being undocumented. The purpose of the criminal justice system is to deliver justice to those who have committed crimes and to protect citizens. However, many blacks feel like the system doesn't do that for them.
I feel like the system was definitely created against the black people and to definitely protect the white person. I do believe that.
I really thought I was gonna be shot that day by the police. And this back then when like Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown got shot. I never thought that would actually happen to me or people around me.
Being black make me uncomfortable around law enforcement. I would say it gives me a bit of pause. It makes me so I'm very cautious.
Again, as I mentioned earlier, show me a decade to where there wasn't police brutality in poor black and brown neighborhoods, then maybe I'll learn something.
The 60s was a decade of very challenging times for black people in law enforcement. There was a plethora of things going on during this decade.
Okay, so the 60s was a very complex time for African Americans in law enforcement. Of course, the 60s is the era of the Black Freedom Movement. You have the Civil Rights Movement beginning.
We're still going through the police brutality system, but because of the civil rights system, it starts to get more notice, especially when you have stuff like the nonviolence movement, and we see police brutality in a different way because police are being used as a vehicle to maintain segregation.
Also, 1963, during the Birmingham campaign, which is probably one of the most notorious campaigns, when you see school children who were marching in protest of segregation are actually attacked by the police with batons. They're attacked by police dogs. They're also sprayed with high-powered water hoses. So that definitely did not shine a very positive light on law enforcement. It drew a lot of criticism. Sometimes law enforcement, people within law enforcement were responsible for the deaths of civil rights activists, such as Freedom Summer in 1964, when 3 civil rights activists go missing. Eventually, it was found out that some of the people that took part in their murder were local deputies and sheriffs who were also members of the Ku Klux Klan.
Well, these were young people. These were school kids who were out protesting. And the fact that Bull Connor thought nothing of, injuring young people who were just fighting for equality speaks very poorly of the police.
You can never whip these boys if you don't keep you and them separate. I found that out in Birmingham. You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
The 90s was a decade that many people won't forget. Race relations were tight with African Americans in law enforcement. Many members of the criminal justice system claimed that they were only trying to do their best to make things better, but many people didn't feel that way.
Technology starts to make a difference. That 1990s when people start to have access to video cameras. So I think people sometimes forget that it's not that when stuff starts to getting recorded in the 90s and the early 2000s that suddenly police brutality is starting. No, now we just have video evidence of it.
90s, when you're looking at police and African Americans, go pick up NWA's first album, and I think that they do a great job explaining what police life was like.
The Rodney King case was a tragic case of police brutality.
With Rodney King, who was driving on the highway in California, Los Angeles, and when he was speeding, he didn't want to get pulled over. He feared being pulled over, so he just kept driving for a while. The police continued to pursue him. Eventually, he does pull over, but when he does pull over, they begin just wailing on him. Quite a few officers began beating him with their batons, tasering him. things of that nature. A guy who lived across the street was watching all this, and he managed to capture it with his camera, his video camera, sent it to local news stations, and the story just continued to spread.
During this decade, many celebrities were using their platform to speak out against police brutality.
Def Comedy Jam, which is coming along in the 1990s. So a lot of your comedians on there are talking about issues that are timely. Stuff like AIDS and police brutality were common topics that were talked about then. Black men having a space where they can actually talk about this experience.
I know y'all seen the Rodney King beating, came on every night, turned into a TV series. Well, let's watch the Rodney King beating tonight, 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, we're whooping his ass just for you.
Towards the end of the 90s, evaluating whether there was justice for African American people, I think it is important to recognize that we had made significant progress, but I think there were still disparities that existed. I think there were situations where African Americans were continued to be treated differently than others. So while progress had been made, there's still much work to be done.
The 2010s was a very heavy time for Black people. There were so many officers not being charged for their crimes, and also many protests were forming.
Roughly since 2010, for African Americans, has been a lot of exposure to a number of these cases where African Americans have been victims of police brutality.
I think that too many lives are lost from police brutality since the 2010s.
The 2010s was a decade that sparked lots of frustration and anger with people due to all the injustice that was going on during the time.
There were several cases in the 2010s, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Castile, Brown, that were in the news.
Each case is tragic. Each case is, I think, wrapped up in the political and social discourse to where what really happened gets lost. And what happened is all these individuals are dead.
The system affects everyone, from younger people to older people. People have different viewpoints on how they view the system. People also have different experiences with the system.
Well, my views on the criminal justice system is that it needs to be revamped. It's a little bit unfair, especially to people of color.
I think that the system isn't designed to always be flawless and perfect, because there's the human element in it.
I feel like there is no justice within the justice system. I feel like they create prisons that are for profit, and I believe that it's a money market when it comes to criminal justice and prison.
Corrupt, unjust, and being ran by people who don't understand where Black people personally come from, especially in the law enforcement.
And then we have issues with mass incarceration, as well as we have some problems with police brutality and other things within the criminal justice system.
Law enforcement and Black people in America have had a very hard relationship for many decades. And honestly, the fight is still continuing now in 2019.
Constant work, constant perseverance, constant intestinal fortitude, and constantly trying to make it better for the future.
Are things better? Not really. I think we just have more tools to deal with it, and we have more often a vocabulary to discuss it, and more students have the opportunity to learn about it because they have more access to the information.
There's a long history of hostility between the Black community and police officers, and that's not going to change overnight, and it's not going to change until people, both sides, are willing to kind of get together and, like I say, have some sort of positive dialogue and create positive initiatives to end brutality and racial profiling.